On December 15th last year, I preached the 13th edition of Come Before Winter. The following Sunday afternoon, Debbie and I welcomed 11 guests to our 12th annual holiday open house. On Christmas Day last year, we had dinner at Debbie's sister's home. The following Saturday, we gathered again at Debbie's parents'. The next week, we traveled to Oklahoma City to be with daughter Christy and her family. From there, we traveled to Plainview to visit daughter Angie and her family. Dietrich and Madeline came home with us for a few days. In January, my high school class began making plans for our 50th reunion. At the end of January, Debbie's mother had back surgery. We were able to be with her and other family members. Last February, Angie was expecting a visit from Debbie and me for her birthday on the 18th. What Angie didn't know was that Christy and Jaden were to arrive at the DFW airport the day before. Debbie and I picked up Christy and Jaden, and we all traveled to Lubbock and spent the night. The next morning, we surprised Angie and her family for her birthday. We had a great birthday celebration and a good visit. Christy and Jaden returned to Mark with Debbie and me for a few more days of visiting. On Saturday, February 22nd, I attended the Camp Crossfire board meeting. We discussed plans for the 2020 session of camp, which would be at a new location in Brady, Texas. The following Tuesday, we took Christy and Jaden to the airport. In early March, Debbie and I traveled to Oklahoma for the Affirming the Faith seminar. We benefited from classes, sermons, and worship. We enjoyed seeing old friends. On the way home, we visited with Debbie's parents, sister, and brother-in-law. In March, we were hearing more and more about something called the coronavirus. Soon, we temporarily canceled worship and other church gatherings. I was no longer able to visit our members in nursing homes or the hospital. The fundraising dinner for Eastern European Mission was postponed. We decided to resume morning worship on April 12th. A brief, small, early morning storm canceled that idea. We did resume worship the following Sunday. On May 5th, our brother Robert Story went home to his Lord. In May, we began a new ministry. Douglas Langston volunteered for an organization in Marlin. They received more food than they could distribute, so Douglas brought surplus food to us. We began distributing food on a regular basis. On May 17th, we resumed Sunday morning Bible class. On June 7th, we resumed Sunday evening worship. In early June, Camp Crossfire 2020 was canceled. On June 26th, my 50th class reunion was postponed until 2021. Our college homecoming in November was virtual. A couple of weeks ago, Debbie and I decided to cancel this year's holiday open house. February was our last visit with Christy and her family. A trip to see the Chicago kids didn't happen. We were able to see Angie and her family in September and again at Thanksgiving. Since we could not have a large family gathering in July, we celebrated Debbie's birthday by Zoom. In late August, we were finally able to visit with Debbie's parents for the first time since March. When Debbie's mother and sister had surgery, we could not be in the waiting room or visit with them. 2020 has been a year of postponements and cancellations. Some would cancel the entire year if they could. The calendar says winter starts tomorrow. It will be warmer than last week. As I do each year on the Sunday before winter begins, my sermon deals with the last recorded words of Paul to Timothy. The meaning of the text is unchangeable. The illustrations vary from year to year. Since this time last year, there have been illnesses, surgeries, birthdays, and births, deaths, and numerous other events that make up life. We're all a year older. Our experiences reinforce the importance of Paul's admonition to Timothy. Read with me from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 9 through 21. Do your best to come to me quickly. For Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia and Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Tychicus to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, and my scrolls, especially the parchments. Alexander the metalworker did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done. You too should be on your guard against him, because he strongly opposed our message. At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack, and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Greet Priscilla and Aquila and the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus stayed in Corinth, and I left Trophimus sick in Miletus. Do your best to get here before winter. Eubas greets you, and so do Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you. Timothy was a young preacher working with the church at Ephesus, located on the west coast of Turkey. And the Apostle Paul was an aged man, several hundred miles away, in prison in Rome. Paul wrote a letter to Timothy and said, "Do your best to come to me quickly." And in verse 21, he said, "Do your best to get here before winter." The King James Version translates the last part of verse 21 with three simple words, "Come before winter." Paul hoped that Timothy, the younger preacher, would come to Rome and spend some time with him in prison. And his hope was that Timothy would do it before winter set in. And then in verse 13, Paul instructed Timothy to stop at Troas on the way and pick up his books, and to stop at the house of Carpus and bring a cloak, an outer garment, which Paul had left there. It was probably still summer when Paul wrote this letter to Timothy, but winter would be coming soon. Roman prisons were not heated in winter. They were dungeons dug out under government buildings. And when the winter storms began to blow, Paul knew that he would be uncomfortably cold in the damp underground prison with just ordinary clothing. And so he urged Timothy to come and bring the cloak and to come before winter. The reason that Paul urged Timothy to come before winter was that back in those days, when winter once set in, navigation was virtually closed on the Mediterranean Sea. It was dangerous for ships even to venture out to sea. We can get some concept of the danger by reading the account of Paul's shipwreck, which occurred sometime earlier, Acts chapter 27. Paul had been out on the Mediterranean just a few winters before and experienced a shipwreck. He knew what it was like to travel in winter. He knew that if Timothy waited until winter had come, he would have to wait until spring. And if he waited until spring, it might be too late. Paul sensed that the day of his execution was fast approaching, and so he wrote this letter to Timothy. Leon Morris writes, "This is a very moving document as we see the aged apostle facing death, looking back on his service for God, and taking tender concern for his son in the faith, that he be strong in the task to which God has called him." As we come to the end of 2 Timothy chapter 4, we are reading the final recorded words of the Apostle Paul. The curtain will soon close on his life. What was on Paul's mind at the end of his life? His last recorded words are mostly about people. There are the personal considerations. Paul says that he is alone except for Luke. He mentions Demas, a friend who had left him in his time of need, choosing to love the world instead. He thought of other good friends, Crescens, Titus, Tychicus, who were serving the Lord in other places. He is grateful that Luke has remained in Rome to give him comfort while in prison. Paul asked Timothy to bring Mark. Some years earlier, Mark had deserted Paul and others on their mission trip. There was such a sharp disagreement over taking Mark on another mission trip that Paul and Barnabas parted company. Now Paul says, he is helpful to me in my ministry. Paul mentions a man named Alexander, the metal worker, who opposed him and did all he could to stop the preaching of the gospel. Paul sends special greetings to friends in distant places, and he sends Timothy greetings from friends in Rome. Paul gives thanks to God for standing by him in his trial when it seems that all had forsaken him. The Lord delivered him from the mouth of the lion and will continue to deliver him so that he has complete confidence that he will one day enter the heavenly kingdom. The aged apostle wanted to see his young friend one final time before he died. And so Paul appeals, do your best to come to me quickly. Do your best to get here before winter. It seems that when Paul said, do your best to get here before winter, he was simply saying, before winter, Timothy, or never. If you don't do it now, if you don't come before winter, it will be too late. A message of Paul's words to Timothy. A very important message is that procrastination is dangerous. What did Timothy do when he received Paul's letter? I like to think that Timothy started out and went toward Troas, picked up the books, and stopped for the cloak at the house of Carpus, and then sailed to Rome. When he arrived at Rome, he found Paul in his prison cell. He likely read to him for a number of days from the Scriptures and was with the apostle during the closing weeks of his life. Tradition says that in the spring, Nero condemned Paul to death. I suspect that Timothy, Luke, and Mark accompanied the great apostle to the place where, according to tradition, he was beheaded. Sometimes there isn't a very good reason why we don't do what we need to do. We're like the man who was asked why he didn't repair the leak in his roof. He always said, well, when the sun is shining, I don't need it repaired, and when it's raining, it's too wet to work on it. It is so easy to put things off. We all know the feeling of putting off, of procrastinating and waiting too long. Someone said procrastination is the thief of time, and another said, do what you need to do before it's too late. Nancy Goulet tells of a friend who always returns phone messages before she goes to bed at night, no matter how late the hour. Why? Because her mother called once, and the message was she didn't want anything. She just called to say hello. When she got home, she saw that her mom had called, but didn't want anything, so she didn't return her call. That night, her mother died. So ever since, she returns calls the same day, no matter what the hour. She never again wants the regret of having meant to, but not doing. Paul's message to Timothy reminds us that every great opportunity of life has its limitations in time. Someone described the stages of life this way. 1, you believe in Santa Claus. 2, your belief in Santa Claus is curtailed. 3, you become Santa Claus, the bearer of gifts. And 4, you look like Santa Claus. Some of us got to that a little earlier in life. Compare a 78-year lifespan to a 365-day calendar. If you are 30, it is May 20. If you are 40, it is July 6. If you are 50, it is August 22nd. If you are 60, it is October 8th. If you are 70, it is November 24th. Life is short. Life's opportunities are like this. Always time is passing. Now, time can be used or wasted. It can be invested or squandered. But either way, once used, it can never be regained. Part of Paul's message is get prepared. That's what he is trying to do. Paul is facing winter. and he isn't waiting until it comes to get ready. Even now he is in the winter of the Spirit. He writes, "For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure." But he is coping. He has what it takes to get through the winter to the time when spring breaks through, whether it is in this life or the next. We need to come before winter in several areas of life. We need to do that in our relationship with our friends. Here's a little quiz for all of us. How many letters have never been written? How many phone calls have never been made? How many compliments have been left unsaid? How many "I'm sorries" remain unspoken? How many thank yous have never been uttered? How many "I love yous" are still unexpressed? How many commitments are still not made because we waited too long? Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "You can never do a kindness too soon, for you never know how soon it will be too late." Too often our intentions don't get translated into actions. The smallest deed is better than the biggest intention. When we think of our friends, is there a friend with whom we need to share the gospel? We must not delay in that. We need to come before winter in our relationship with family members. When I was a young parent, I was a bit annoyed by all the folks who said, "Your children will grow up before you know it." Now I say the same thing to young parents. In one home, a plaque hung in the window over the kitchen sink, and it said this: "Raising children, the days are long, but the years are short." A little over 4 weeks ago, a longtime friend experienced the death of his wife. He is heartbroken. He is grieving. Last Monday, our niece's mother-in-law died unexpectedly of a heart attack. Another husband is grieving. A few months ago, Steve Mullins retired. On Friday, at the age of 65, he died of COVID. A wife is grieving. We need to give attention to our spouse right now. Thomas Carlyle was a giant in the field of literature. He married a secretary who labored with him for years in his prolific writings. He was so absorbed in his work that he let her continue working for several weeks after she became ill. She had a slow-growing cancer. Finally, she was confined to her bed. Carlyle loved her, but never found time to stay with her very long. When the end came and they took her to the cemetery, it was a rainy day and the mud was deep. After the funeral, Carlyle returned home, badly shaken. He climbed the stairs to his wife's room and sat in a chair by her bed, realizing how little time he had spent with her in her illness. He picked up her bedside diary and glanced through it. A sentence jumped from its pages. "Yesterday, he spent an hour with me. It was like being in heaven. I love him so." He turned to the next page. The words broke his heart. "I've listened all day for his steps in the hall, but now it is late, and I guess he won't come today." He read a few more pages, threw the book down, and rushed through the rain to the cemetery. His friends found him face down in the mud of that new grave, weeping and saying over and over, "If I had only known, if I'd only known." The preacher made some big changes in his life priorities. He said, "I've been running around killing myself trying to please people who probably won't even attend my funeral if I got sick and died. But I've neglected my wife, who would care for me and empty my bedpan without complaint until my last days." We need to love our spouse and care for them now. Do we need to say, "I love you" to someone? If so, do it now. We need to give attention to the elderly. Henry was getting old, and as many do, he was downsizing. He was moving from his house of many years into a small apartment. He was widowed and realized that his health was not as great as it used to be. He knew he could not take all of his possessions to his apartments, and he really didn't want to. What he wanted was someone to go through the process with him. He asked Bruce to come over and help. But many of us find other things to do than to help someone go through their personal belongings. Yet after being asked several times, Bruce realized he needed to go and help this old brother in Christ. When he got there, he expected to find boxes of belongings and planned to spend several hours. What he found was nothing more than a shoebox on the kitchen table. Henry didn't need anyone to go through his personal belongings. He just wanted to tell someone how important these few things were to him. Henry pulled out the death certificate of his wife and talked for a while about their marriage, that they were never able to have children. Then Henry pulled out an old picture of his mother and showed it to Bruce. Henry talked about how his mother read him the Bible every night and was the one that helped him to come to know God. Then there were some newspaper clippings of the mill where Henry worked for almost 40 years. He was proud of his work and his life. Then he piled everything back into the shoebox, put on the lid, and thanked Bruce. Debbie's parents are 89 years old. In fact, her mother has a birthday next month. Debbie's mother's health has not been good this last year or two. Until COVID prevented it, Debbie and I were making frequent trips to see her parents. We are grateful that we were able to visit them yesterday. Now is the time to make those visits, because we don't have a promise of tomorrow. We must give attention to the elderly now. Their winter is coming soon. We need to come before winter in our relationship with Jesus. You've probably heard this little poem. Solomon Grundy was born on Monday, christened on Tuesday, married on Wednesday, taken ill on Thursday, worse on Friday, died on Saturday, buried on Sunday. And that was the end of Solomon Grundy. But it wasn't the end. Not if Solomon Grundy was a real person. This life is a time of preparation for the next. Today is the day of salvation. Tomorrow may never come. The Bible always says today, not tomorrow. Come to Christ while you have the opportunity and while you have the desire. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 2 says, I tell you, now is the time of God's favor. Now is the day of salvation. Some things in life need to be done now. Otherwise, it may be too late to do them. Others may die. We may die. Jesus may come. David Rubinoff, the violin virtuoso, toured the country for many years, captivating Americans with his artistry. At 90 years old, Mr. Rubinoff was still performing, especially before young audiences who were simply enthralled by the music that poured from Rubinoff's violin. Each time he played, he ended by reading a poem engraved in a watch presented to him by his friend, the late Will Rogers. It went like this. For the clock of life is wound but once, and no one has the power to tell just when the hand will stop, at late or early hour. Now is the time we have, live, love, toil, work with a will. Do not wait for tomorrow, for the clock may then be still. As a youngster in Oklahoma, I heard Rubinoff play his $100,000 Stradivarius violin. That is my first memory of that poem. The music was wonderful, but the poem was powerful. I discovered that there is a middle verse to the poem that apparently wasn't engraved on the watch. To lose one's wealth is sad indeed. To lose one's health is more. To lose one's soul is such a loss that no man can restore. That verse gives the reason to use the time we have and not procrastinate. Come quickly,